So recording should be started and I'll share. So today we're going to start with our first class topic, which will be on natural gas energy efficiency and rebates for natural gas related efficiency measures. So we'll start off by talking a little bit about what is natural gas. So natural gas is a fossil fuel product that is primarily composed of methane. It'll have small amounts of ethane, other alkanes, and associated gases, but it's primarily methane, a little bit of ethane, and then commercial or pipeline quality natural gas has mercaptan added as an odorizer. So without that mercaptan, the natural gas would be odorless and you couldn't detect a leak. So that mercaptan is a sulfur compound that's given so that you can smell it if there's a leak and be aware because it is highly flammable. And so natural gas typically is sold based on its energy content. So even though you might see gas associated with a volume, the way it's sold and transferred is through the energy content. And when we talk about natural gas, we're usually talking about, in both IIAC and stepwise reports, we're using BTU. So is million, a single BTU would be 1,000 BTU. So these are imperial units, not quite as helpful as metric units, but an BTU is equal to 1 million BTUs of energy. A lot of times within the gas utility industry, you'll see alternate energy terms, which are a decatherm or a therm. So a decatherm is the same as an BTU, and a decatherm also equals 10 therms of energy. So if you know the energy content of the gas that you're looking at, you can also find the volume delivered using the specific heat content. That's actually published by the EIA, so the Energy Information Administration. They have a site that will show the heat content of natural gas consumed by state, by year. So if we look down here at Utah, you'll see that for 2020, that the average energy content of natural gas delivered in the state of Utah was 1,045 BTUs per cubic foot of natural gas. So that's a resource to convert between volume and energy content of gas. So you're probably familiar with natural gas. Probably a lot of you have gas furnaces, gas stoves, maybe gas laundry or gas water heating in your house. Those are the most common uses for natural gas, both in commercial, residential, and industrial processes. We also get a lot of our electricity through natural gas-fired power stations. Rocky Mountain Power has continually either retrofitted or decommissioned their old coal-fired plants and are going with natural gas. So the energy landscape in the United States has shifted considerably over the last 20 to 25 years because of natural gas abundance here. And a lot of our electricity that was generated by coal has been supplanted by natural gas and then renewables coming onto the grid. Compared to other emission sources, natural gas has fewer emissions than coal or oil. It's still a fossil fuel, and so it's not quite as, it's not renewable in the sense, it's not renewable and it does produce greenhouse gas emissions, but it is often a lower cost per energy content, which we'll get into on the next slide. Basically, if you're trying to do heating, natural gas is usually the least expensive way to do it. If you're looking at an electric resistance heater, it's 100% efficient at converting electricity to heat, but you're still going through intermediate conversion steps to get gas to electricity back to heat if that electricity is generated in a gas-fired plant somewhere. So There is a technology called a heat pump that makes electricity pretty competitive with natural gas for heating, but that's still an emerging field. So part of the reason why natural gas is a little bit easier to work with for heating is that it's a primary energy source that's delivered directly to the consumer. So depending on the efficiency of the grid and the type of resource mix used by your electric provider, for electricity, if you convert source energy into electricity, distribute it, and deliver it to a customer, you're really only delivering to the customer about 27 to 38% of the initial energy content. So every time you turn on a light switch and the light bulbs come on, that electricity is generated somewhere else, and there are losses as it goes through the generation system, through the transmission system, and gets to your house. For natural gas, the energy losses along the way are in the extracting and transportation of it. But because it's generally delivered straight to your house through a pipeline and then used directly on site, you're getting about 91% of the initial energy content. So how is natural gas typically used within the commercial and industrial sectors? And C&I is commercial and industrial. So this is from a report from a gas utility in Connecticut called Eversource, and they looked at all of their customers and wanted to know how many customers there were and how they used natural gas in their processes, and they broke it down by sector. So basically across everywhere we're going to go, in manufacturing, in laboratories, big commercial buildings, school districts, government buildings, you see that space heating is the majority of what natural gas is used for. It's between 70 and 95% of gas used in various sectors is to heat buildings, to keep them warm. Connecticut is relatively similar to Utah, about the same climate zone. So it's pretty representative of this area. IIAC audits will also have pretty large process heating requirements. I bet most people here have been to at least one assessment where they are using gas to directly heat a product or maintain something at a specific temperature. In some instances, natural gas might be the feedstock for some material that they're producing. So the natural gas, or the methane at least inside of it, is the feedstock for something else. And there are some industries that have significant domestic hot water use. So DHW is domestic hot water, and that's basically water used for cooking, showering, doing laundry, like culinary water inside your house. So think of like your gas water heater at home. Usually it's a storage tank, or you might have one of those instant gas water heaters that does a big as soon as you need some hot water. Some places like hospitals and maybe a gym or a swimming pool might have significant use for, just a lot of people taking showers, a lot of laundry to take care of. So that's not super common, but it's also one of the larger sectors of gas use in the industry. So as we talk about how to evaluate the natural gas use during our assessments and our audits, we'll be looking for measures and recommendations to suggest to customers about how to reduce gas use in their facility. So Eversource in Connecticut had a list of the most common measures by number of measures and the most common by largest quantity of savings. And so as you look through this list, I'll highlight a couple of things that stand out to me at least. The first is condensing boilers, condensing furnaces, and condensing water heaters. So we'll talk a little bit more about condensing, what it means to have a condensing, why condensing equipment saves energy. We'll also talk about some of these measures of efficiency within different combustion equipment. We'll talk about thermal efficiency, which is TE. We'll talk about AFUE, which is an annual fuel utilization efficiency, and Energy Star. And these are all ratings or certifications to show the efficiency of different types of equipment. And then we will talk about infrared and radiant systems. We'll talk basically about what the various types of heating applications are in a building or in a process that we might see. Is there anything that stands out to anyone else on this list or what we've talked about so far? Any maybe other measures that you've seen quite a bit in your IIAC experience? No? All right, we will head on then. So a lot of what we see for space heating with natural gas is divided by the type of system that we're using. So one of the most common heating systems using natural gas is a forced air system. So this is basically a furnace, or a lot of times in facilities, you'll see something like a gas unit heater right here on the left. This is basically just a hanging furnace, and a lot of times in hangars or big bays, they'll just be up on the wall in one of the corners. These are basically pieces of equipment that you send gas through, you burn it, and you transfer that heat into air, and that air is distributed through the building. So your furnace at home, sends air through the ducts, and that air leaving the ducts through the rest of your space is how your home stays warm and toasty. And furnaces are fairly common to see in smaller buildings. When we get into larger buildings, a lot of the time we'll see a hot water system, which can also be referred to as a hydronic heating system. And this is basically a boiler that is heating water in a loop, and that water is the heating medium that distributes that heat to the rest of the building. So that hot water will go into a loop. The loop will feed into coils in various rooms or areas, and there will be air passing over that coil to distribute through the room. But because the primary transfer method of that heat is the water in the loop, that's why it's different than a forced air system. And then sometimes you may see an infrared or a radiant heating system, and they kind of look like this. I know that I saw a lot of these when we went out to the Salt Lake Department of Airports, that these types of systems don't heat up either water or air. They actually produce such a high intensity heat that it transfers directly through electromagnetic radiation to land directly on a surface. So they really aren't heating and transferring heat through a medium. They're doing it through an electromagnetic wave. And so there's no transfer to a medium, and then from the medium, it's just directly to the surface that is being warmed. So these are, in certain applications, they're recommended, especially if you don't have to keep the air warm. If it's more about keeping things warm rather than the air or the space, these are a great recommendation. A lot of times you might hear a difference between an indirect fired and a direct fired heater. So kind of the difference between these is that a direct fired heater will have the the actual gas that's being burned, that combustion air is leaving with that gas, and it's part of the heat medium that's being delivered. An indirect fired heater, the combustion gases from the burning are contained within a tube or a coil, and air or water is passing over that tube or coil to pick up the heat. So pretty much everything we'll see in most applications is going to be indirect fired. There are only a couple of applications where we would see a direct fired heating source. Sometimes we'll see direct fired applications serving kitchens, sometimes hangars and garages, where you're not quite as concerned about the combustion byproducts in those. Those combustion byproducts really aren't great to breathe. And so with a direct fired heater, you'd be getting those combustion byproducts in the space. And so where you have a lot of leakage, air coming in and out, or a lot of turnover, then you're not quite as worried about that. But for most applications, people don't want to breathe that. And you can't guarantee that it won't be a dangerous level. So combustion efficiency metrics are usually certified by the manufacturer of the equipment. Thermal efficiency or combustion efficiency are standard for boilers. Most of the time, when you look up a boiler, the manufacturer will have specific product information that corresponds to tests that it ran according to a certain standard. And because those standards are universal, it's a pretty good way to compare one boiler to another. Afue is a similar efficiency metric for furnaces. So if you're comparing two furnaces and one has a higher Afue, that means it will be more efficient, that it will put out the same amount of heat with less input gas. And Energy Star is a certification for certain types of water heaters and some food service equipment. So like in a restaurant, an Energy Star certification basically means that the piece of equipment in question is more efficient than 75% of other products on the market, or it exceeds a certain efficiency minimum. So these are all tips or ways to judge one versus another. A lot of times when we're working with a boiler or a furnace, we'll ask, how often is your furnace tuned up? How often do you do a flue gas analysis test to verify the combustion efficiency has not departed from what it was when you installed it? This is something we're really hoping to get you all experience with. The IIAC does have a little handheld flue gas analyzer. We just put new batteries in it, so it should be working. And what it will do is it will test the composition of the gases coming out of the flue of a furnace or a boiler or something similar. And it will show what the excess oxygen level is coming out. The idea is that the stoichiometric combustion of air you should minimize the amount of air that you're putting into the system to only slightly exceed the stoichiometric ratio that you need for combustion of natural gas. And so that's usually attainable to about 3 or 4%. So in a perfectly tuned system, you'd have about 3 or 4% oxygen on the flue gas coming out. If you don't have enough oxygen in the combustion chamber, you're going to produce carbon monoxide, and that is both a health and safety hazard. That's a very poisonous gas, and people can and have died from carbon monoxide poisoning. You probably have a meter in your house for it. It's also an incomplete burn, and so you're wasting energy because there's still combustion energy that could be extracted from that carbon to oxygen bond. So a well-tuned piece of equipment can get away with about 3% excess oxygen coming out. When you start getting to something higher than that, like an 8 or 12% oxygen in your flue gas coming out, that means that you're sending in too much air, and the nitrogen that's going in with that air is carrying away some of the heat that you could otherwise use. So that's why the objective with our flue gas analyzer is to identify how much excess oxygen there is, and then recommend that they bring it back down to a lower or a more efficient operating point. We will also work probably a lot with waste heat recovery. It's really hard to give a recommendation for waste heat recovery from a process system because those are almost all custom and unique. You might have 500-degree heat available from, a furnace or a foundry somewhere. And the challenge is finding a match between the availability of the heat and a demand for it somewhere else. So when you're working in a foundry or a manufacturing facility, identifying what the temperature is of that waste heat and how steadily available it is will help you find ways to match it somewhere else in the plant. And then it can also be very tricky to actually deliver heat from one place to another. This is an example down here on the left of waste heat recovery from exhaust air. This is pretty common in commercial HVAC use, where the air that's inside is already warm and toasty. So you run it through a cross-current heat exchanger to pick up some of that heat from fresh air, ventilation air that you're bringing in. But this is just one example of a very common packaged box solution. When you're working with a manufacturing process, it can be a lot more tricky to get waste heat recovery implemented. So let's talk a little bit more about a condensing boiler or a condensing furnace. The reason that condensing boilers are more efficient is because they have a secondary heat exchanger that is condensing the water in the flue gas and using that heat recovered to preheat the incoming water or the returning water flowing into the boiler. A standard furnace or a non-condensing furnace won't have this second heat exchanger here. So the return flow will just go straight into the combustion chamber. The gas will heat it up and then it will be sent out to the building. So the secondary heat exchanger so the combustion products include gas and CO2, and that gas is in a vapor phase. So condensing that CO2 results in that latent heat being recovered, going into the returning water. And then you'll have liquid condensate coming out of that flue gas. There are certain considerations for installing a condensing boiler. You need to have this return flow coming in at a temperature that's colder than the outlet gas going out so that it can absorb that heat. And you also need to make sure that you dispose of this condensate properly because it can require some treatment. It can be a little bit caustic. But the payoff is that with a non-condensing boiler, your maximum efficiency is going to be about 80%. There might be some applications that get 81 or 82, but most boilers are pretty much stuck at 80%. When you get into a condensing boiler model, you can get efficiencies between 94 and 97%. So you're extracting 14 to 17% more heat with the same amount of gas that you're burning on the input. And then another measure that we've worked with pretty commonly, both in the IIAC and in the stepwise program, is boiler controls. So we work with something called an O2 trim control system. And an O2 trim control system basically consists of an oxygen sensor in the exhaust that links to the fuel valve and the combustion air valve and allows those to independently modulate to maintain that 3 to 4% excess O2 coming out. Now, in order to make that work, you have to have independent control over your air and your fuel so that you can get the ideal ratio between those. So a lot of older boilers will have those kind of linked with a jack shaft, so they don't have independent control. But retrofitting those or getting a new boiler that does have those should be a priority. And one way this can be done is with a VFD on the combustion air damper. So that's an opportunity for electric savings as well. Any questions so far, or maybe in your assessments that you've worked on so far? I know Matt has been working very closely with a boiler manufacturer, asking questions about condensing versus non-condensing boilers. Anything else you'd like to add, Matt, that you've learned? Looks like he's getting his audio working.
Yeah, sorry, I have to do audio on my phone. But no, nothing more to add, but this definitely solidified, especially the graphic on the top left, helps solidify my understanding of exactly how it's working. I knew that there was a separate heat exchanger and that they were, removing heat through condensation and like adding it into the system, but I couldn't quite envision how it worked, but now I do. So I'm glad to see it.
Yeah. This second heat exchanger usually has to be made out of stainless steel because the condensate is caustic. So the extra expense of a condensing boiler is for kind of a higher quality heat exchanger right there, and the extra engineering that goes into it.
And Michael, I have a question about the previous slide, sorry.
Yeah.
Is the combustion air damper like a blower? Does it work like a blower, or?
It can be either a blower. On large boilers, you'll have like basically a fan or a blower that sends the combustion air in. Sometimes on a smaller boiler, you don't have a fan. Like on your furnace at home, you probably don't have a separate fan that brings in air and feeds it into the combustion chamber. It just draws it in naturally from the air in your house. So that's a good question, and it depends on the type of boiler or furnace you're looking at. A lot of times, so we have the ability to log current on a lot of the pieces of equipment we see in a factory. The only place to do electric logging on a boiler is usually on the combustion air fan. And that combustion air fan will tell you how often and how intensely that boiler is burning, because whenever there's combustion going on, that fan will be running and supplying the air that's required, the oxygen that's required for that burn. Good question, Mateo. Any other questions? These are some of the more common things that I've worked with, at least in the IAC. So the other thing we want to talk about is how Dominion and third-party suppliers provide gas to customers. And we work with GS, TS, and FS rate schedules primarily. These are the three rate schedules that Dominion has for its customers. So the similarity between GS and FS service is that those customers are buying natural gas from Dominion. The difference between GS and FS is that a GS customer is usually a lot smaller, and they're primarily using it only for seasonal heating and maybe some small loads like water heating or cooking. An FS customer has a really, really significant gas load during the summer. So they have something that's going on year round. That might be a natatorium, a swimming pool. It might be someplace like a greenhouse, or for some reason they have a really steady base load that's more than 35 or 40% of what they use on the coldest day in the winter. Now, the difference between GS and FS is that the difference between GS and FS and transportation service, or TS, is that a TS customer is not buying gas from Dominion. They're buying gas from a third-party wholesaler, and they're paying Dominion to use Dominion's pipeline to deliver the gas to their building or wherever they need it. So Dominion says, that's fine, you'll pay a large administrative fee, and we'll deliver the gas through our pipeline, and that's all you're paying for. Now, this is going to be far and away the most common type of customer we work with. It'll be high schools, manufacturing, large commercial buildings, large industrial buildings. Those will pretty much all be on TS. Now, the most important thing, and everyone sear this into your brain, when we're talking about gas incentives, only customers on a GS rate schedule can receive Dominion incentives. FS customers and TS customers do not pay the surcharge on their bill every month, so they cannot receive those incentives because they don't pay into the pot that does that. And the stepwise program is basically developed in order to kind of offer an opportunity to TS rate customers by going through an assessment and then going directly to the Public Service Commission, because otherwise a transportation service customer would not be able to get incentives at all. And when you get into a TS rate schedule, Dominion reserves the right to interrupt supply if it's a really, really cold day. There are some special cases for interruptible versus an uninterruptible service for your natural gas, but usually that doesn't change the rate that you're paying very much. So a lot of times we're evaluating whether a customer should switch between a GS rate schedule or a TS rate schedule. And so these are from Dominion's tariff, and these are the gas prices that they charge. Dominion's tariff is a really, really dense thing to read, but it is public and it's filed with the Public Service Commission. And so these are just rates pulled from this section of, so I just pulled these figures from the sections, but it shows exactly how much Dominion charges for every piece of gas that is sold on these different rate schedules. So if we're evaluating whether a customer should switch to a TS rate schedule, we want to look at these prices here. So if they're on a GS rate schedule, all decatherms over 45 in a month, they're going to be paying this much per decatherm. For a transportation rate schedule, identify, first the quantity, but they're going to be paying about this, plus the cost from the supplier. The other thing to note is this administrative charge of $3,000 per year is kind of like the offset. So this is a pretty simple calculation. You look at what they're currently paying on a GS rate schedule, either from this or from their bills if you know it. This number comes directly from there. When does this quantity of gas, this X is the quantity of gas, when is that quantity of gas large enough that this number on the right is lower than this number on the left? So obviously, costs from suppliers on a TS rate schedule, I've seen them be like $2.80 per MMBTU. I've seen them be $3.50 per MMBTU, but getting it from a supplier is always a lot cheaper than getting it directly from Dominion. The question is just, at what point is the quantity large enough that it overcomes that administrative fee every year? So that's basically how you would do it, evaluate a case of switching from GS to TS. Now, if the customer is on a GS rate schedule, they can get incentives for many, many things. This list of incentives is available on Dominion's website, well, on the Thermwise website, which is which is thermwise.com/business rebates. If you want to look at that list, you can go to this available rebates PDF right here. These are for things that they just buy and install that meet a certain efficiency level. So for example, this boiler right here, if it's between these sizes of output and it has a thermal efficiency of this high or greater, they'll get $3.50 per kBTU of the rated capacity. Pretty simple. Things that don't fit on this list will go under the custom rebate service. So Dominion's custom rebate is $1 per therm that you save with a project cost of 50%, a cap of 50% of the project costs. So that is anything that's not on here can go through there. And if you're doing a custom project, Dominion will also offer an incentive directly to the analyst based on the number of decatherms that the project will save. Otherwise, Dominion doesn't offer, doesn't pay engineering firms to do energy efficiency rebates analysis. This is the way you can get that. So if you're doing a custom project, you can get $2.50 per decatherm, and it decreases as the projects get bigger, but this is something that the IAC or individual analysts anywhere could apply for and receive if they do all the work for submitting, verifying, analyzing, and executing a custom gas project. So there are two other topics I'd like to briefly cover, which is combined heat and power. Combined heat and power is a way of generating both electricity and heat on site, and it does it more efficiently than generating them separately. It's been really difficult to get this implemented anywhere because it's very capital intensive, but it does have benefits in terms of reliability, and you know that you'll have this backup source of power if you lose power, and you can generate the same amount of useful electricity and natural gas and heat with a much greater efficiency overall than doing them separately. And then we've also had a couple of assessments that have looked at renewable natural gas, usually from wastewater treatment. Renewable natural gas is basically a process of creating pipeline quality natural gas from methane from a digester or a landfill, and then purifying it to such point that it's identical to pipeline natural gas. So it comes from a renewable source, therefore it's carbon neutral in the sense that the carbon that comes out when you burn it is the exact same as the carbon that went in when it was being produced by whatever bacteria was eating that in the digester. A lot of times when you're working with a renewable natural gas project, it's the renewable energy credit that's more valuable than the gas itself. Some states like California have mandates for the quantity of, the fraction of renewably sourced energy. So utilities in California like to buy the renewable energy credits to show that they're meeting that mandate. And if you're at home, you can opt into a green therm program and buy these renewable energy credits for your home energy consumption. But this is kind of a developing field in both in Dominion, in this local area, and nationwide. A lot of research is going on in there. So that is my presentation for today. And I'll open it up to questions, and then by the end of today, I'll have more information for follow-up work. The 24 hours I've had since our cancellation yesterday hasn't given me enough time to get that all thought out yet, but this was the first priority, and then we'll get to that next week. So any questions?
Are we still working with that engineering consulting company for the renewable natural gas stuff?
With the which company?
It was like an engineering consulting company. I don't remember the name of them.
Is that the one at
think
Bountiful?
I think so. Are they the ones that were proposing like a virtual pipeline?
Yeah, yeah.
I think we still are. I don't know how far that's gone recently though, but given
You'd have to ask Mariah about that. I don't know anymore because I haven't been on the assessment in 6 months.
yeah, we've had several assessments at wastewater plants and we've been talking with them on each of them, I think, and that I'm not sure how that's progressing at this point, but I think we're still working with them. Any other questions or thoughts or things you've seen with gas out on your assessments and facilities?
Hey, Michael, you mentioned something about the credits for renewable energy. You mentioned that those were a thing in California. Are those a thing? Are those a thing in Utah right now, or will they be in the near future?
So Utah doesn't have a mandate or a roadmap to like getting renewables into our system. The thing is, those renewable energy credits can be generated here and then bought by someone in California. So they are a thing in Utah in the sense that if you generate the renewable energy credit here, you can sell it to California or to Massachusetts or to wherever, and it's still just as valuable. Now, as more states and more local entities pass those types of mandates, and that will hopefully drive the price of those renewable credits up, which gives more incentive to produce those, hopefully kickstarting more renewable natural gas or more renewable energy projects. So Utah doesn't have such a mandate. The value of those credits is driven by states that do have mandates, and the more states that pass those mandates, the more valuable those credits are. So not yet. Talk to your legislator.
Thank you.
Well, I'll stick around for a little bit longer to continue answering questions, but this is the conclusion of our class for today. There will be some upcoming class task things to work on, but you're all free to sign off and enjoy your afternoon and your long Labor Day weekend.
Thanks, Michael. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
You're welcome.
Hey, Michael.
Yeah.
I bought a few of those I don't know, biofuel credits, I guess, for my own, homes, natural gas. So you say that they're not so much useful here in Utah, but if more places start to adopt them, they become more valuable. So would that happen for me? Like, would they increase in value as like the market value increases for them? Is that like kind of like a stock I'm picturing?
It's not like a permanent stock that you own. It's kind of like it's kind of like a badge that says, 10% of my natural gas use at my home comes from renewable sources.
Oh,
So
okay.
it's all. So Dominion's program is very small scale. The LA Department of Water and Power has a mandate that like 80% of LADP's DPWs, like City of Los Angeles has a mandate that says 80% of all of its energy needs to come from renewable sources. So LA Department of Water and Power is out buying like crazy to meet that mandate by whatever time, 2030 or whatever. So it could be in the future that that credit that you own will either be worth a larger amount of renewable gas, or the cost of it will increase for the same amount depending on the market. It's creating a market for that green credit, that green attribute of the renewable natural gas.
Okay. Oh, cool.
And for someone to buy a renewable energy credit without the pressure of a mandate just indicates that they're supporting renewable energy, that they're offsetting or making their company more sustainable. It is a way to say that my company supports clean energy, my company supports environmental protection, because our electricity, our natural gas is renewable, comes from a green source. There's no distinction in the actual gas. It's not the literal gas that's being delivered to you. You're just purchasing that credit, so you get to claim that the renewable natural gas produced in Utah is being used in your system because you've bought that renewable energy credit associated with that gas.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
It kind of makes sense.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well, thanks.
Yeah. Thanks. Enjoy your afternoon.